She didn't just use my garage, she erased me from it. HOA Karen filled it wall to wall with her junk, like she had already decided ownership didn't matter anymore. And then she fined me for the exact mess she forced into my space, like I was the one who needed permission to exist inside. 8 months of her things sitting there without movement, without acknowledgement, without even the courtesy of pretending they would ever leave. Boxes stacked to the ceiling like they were claiming territory, one layer at a time. A dead elliptical rusting in the corner like a monument to neglect that wasn't mine. A rolled rug leaking out a smell so stale and invasive it felt like it was rewriting the air itself. Then the letter came. Clean, official, stamped with authority she thought I couldn't challenge. $150. Violation. Garage aesthetics. Her junk, my fine. That was the moment it stopped being an inconvenience and became something else entirely. Something sharper, something deliberate. I called her, and she answered like she had already won, like this was just another quiet enforcement she would glide through without resistance. Derek, darling, the HOA has standards, and a man in your position should understand that. Before we move forward, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? A man in your position should know better than to let things get like this. I stood there listening, not interrupting, not correcting her once, just letting her build that version of reality she needed to feel comfortable. Then I told her I would fix it. Tonight. Calm, even, final. She liked that answer. I could hear it in the way her tone softened, just enough to signal satisfaction. She thought compliance was coming. She thought I had stepped back into the place she had already decided I belonged in. That belief was the crack everything else would split through. The night settled in cold and sharp, the kind of cold that strips distractions away and leaves you alone with exactly what you're dealing. I stepped out into the driveway and opened the garage wide, letting that air cut straight through everything she had forced into it. The single bulb overhead flickered like it was barely holding on, casting weak light across stacks that didn't belong to me, across equipment I never asked for, across a space that had been mine for 11 years before she decided it wasn't. I stood there without moving, just looking, letting it settle one last time before I removed it. No noise, no music, no hesitation, just silence and clarity. People think decisions like this come with doubt, with second guessing, with hesitation creeping in at the edges, but they don't understand what happens when you've been pushed slowly in one direction long enough. There's a point where it stops being a decision and starts being a correction. That's where I was standing, right there on cold concrete, staring at something that had been taken from me piece by piece until there was nothing left to argue about. The smell was wrong, and that was the part that stayed with me more than anything else. Not the clutter, not the space, not even the fine. The smell, that mix of cedar, dust, and something sour underneath that didn't belong to anything I had ever worked on. My garage used to smell like effed, like something had been fixed, like something had been built with intention. Now it smelled like storage, like neglect, like someone else's problems sitting still long enough to rot into the air. That's when it became clear in a way that didn't leave room for delay. She didn't just take space, she replaced it. She replaced what belonged to me with something that didn't, and then acted like I was the one out of line for noticing. I stepped back into the driveway and looked down the street for a sec. Quiet. No movement. No one watching. Houses sitting still like nothing was happening. That's the thing about situations like this. From the outside, everything looks normal. Nobody sees the slow takeoff, the quiet pressure, the way control shifts one small step at a time until suddenly it's gone. They only see the aftermath, if they see anything at all, and by then, it usually doesn't matter. But this time it did. This time I caught it before it settled in permanently. I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table, not to think, but to confirm. Thinking leads to hesitation. Confirmation leads to action. I already knew what I was going to do. I just needed to make sure every part of it held. No gaps, no weak points, nothing she could reach once it started. That's how you take control back from someone who thinks they own it. You don't argue with them. You remove the ground they're standing on. I picked up my phone and pulled up the camera feed of the garage, watching it from a distance instead of standing inside it. Same mess, same invasion, same violation of something that had taken me years to build. And right there, looking at it through a screen instead of standing in it, everything simplified. It wasn't layered anymore. It wasn't emotional. It was just a problem sitting there waiting for the simplest possible solution. And once you see it that way, once you strip everything else away, the next move becomes obvious. I didn't tell anyone what I was about to do. I didn't ask for advice. I didn't give her another warning. She had already been given time. 8 months of it. 8 months where I didn't push, didn't escalate, didn't force anything. She chose to do nothing with that time. That wasn't my responsibility anymore. That was her mistake, and I was done carrying. The clock pushed past 9, and the neighborhood fell into that quiet rhythm where people stop paying attention to anything outside their own walls. That's when things get done. Not in the middle of the day when everything everything is visible, not when there's noise and questions and attention. At night, when everything slows down and nobody expects anything to change. That's when you make a move that doesn't leave room for interruption. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked back out to the garage. The cold hit harder this time, but it didn't matter. Nothing about this moment was about comfort anymore. I stepped inside and stood in the center of it, surrounded by everything she thought she controlled. I looked at it one last time, not to reconsider, not to hesitate, just to mark the final moment it would ever look like this again. Then I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the one thing she never considered I would use. Not a complaint, not a threat, not a legal argument. Something faster, something simpler, something that didn't need her permission and didn't give her time to react. I started typing slowly, not because I didn't know what to say, but because every word mattered. Free pickup tonight, first come, first served, no holds, gone by morning. No explanation, no negotiation, just a statement of what was about to happen. I read it once, then again, making sure there was no space in it for hesitation or confusion. Once it went live, it wouldn't belong to me anymore, and it definitely wouldn't belong to her. I held my thumb over the screen for a second, not out of doubt, but out of recognition. This was the moment everything shifted. 8 months of quiet pressure turning into one irreversible move. Most people wait for permission to do something like this. They wait for validation. They wait for someone else to tell them it's justified. I didn't need that. She had already given me everything I needed by doing nothing for 8 months. I pressed post. For a second, nothing happened. Just the quiet hum of the garage and the faint buzz of that old light overhead. Then my phone vibrated once. Then again, faster this time. Messages stacking. Names I didn't recognize. People asking if it was still available. If they could come now. If they could take everything. That's when it became real. Not in theory, not in planning, but in motion. What had been sitting still for 8 months was about to move all at once, and she wasn't going to be able to stop it. Headlights turned onto the street sooner than I expected, cutting through the darkness and rolling straight toward my driveway like they had been pulled there. A truck pulled up, engine running. 2 guys stepping out with the kind of energy that doesn't waste time asking questions. They looked into the garage, saw what they came for, and moved immediately. No hesitation, no concern. They grabbed the rug first, dragging it out like it had never belonged there in the first place. The smell hit the cold air and disappeared instantly, like it had been waiting to leave. They loaded it up, nodded once, and drove off without another word. And just like that, the first piece of her control was gone. My name is Derek Calloway, and I don't move fast. I move correctly. 54 years old, retired pipe fitter, 30 years of work that taught me one thing most people never learn until it's too late. The man who writes it down, tracks it, and waits always ends up holding the advantage. I'm not loud, I'm not reactive, and I don't waste energy on arguments that don't produce results. I build systems that don't fail, and I live inside routines that don't leave room for chaos. That garage she took over wasn't just a place to park a truck. It was the one place in my life where everything made sense because I made it make sense. 11 years of shaping it exactly how I wanted, not how someone else expected it to look, not how a rule book dictated, but how it functioned best for the work I did and the way I thought. Pegboards mapped with precision, tools outlined like a blueprint, every wrench, every socket, every piece exactly where it belonged. The concrete floor wasn't just clean, it reflected discipline, the kind you don't fake and you don't lose unless someone forces it out of you. The smell of that space used to tell you everything you needed to know about. WD-40, sawdust, oil, metal, all of it layered together in a way that meant something had been done there, something real, something finished. That's what she replaced, and that's what she never understood. Maple Rest Estates looks quiet if you don't pay attention. 87 homes lined up like everything runs smoothly. One community pool nobody really uses as much as they say they do, and a Facebook group where grown adults argue like it matters more than it does. On the surface, it's predictable, controlled, stable, but underneath that, there's a structure, and inside that structure there's pressure, and at the center of that pressure sits one person who decides how it gets applied. HOA Karen didn't create that system, but she figured out how to use it better than anyone else in that neighborhood. She didn't shout, she didn't argue, she didn't lose control in public. She enforced calm, steady, calculated enforcement that made people adjust without realizing they were adjusting. That's how she operated, and that's why most people never pushed back. They didn't even realize they were being pushed. She looked exactly like the role she played. Always put together, always sharp, always carrying herself like she had already decided what the outcome of any situation would be before before it even started. White Cadillac SUV parked like it belonged at the front of everything. Linen blazers in months where nobody else would even think about wearing, like she was always on the edge of issuing something official. She didn't talk to people, she processed them. Every interaction felt like it was being filed somewhere, categorized, evaluated for later use. That's what made her dangerous in a place like that. She didn't react emotionally. She applied pressure structurally. Her husband, Ron, was the opposite of everything she represented. Quiet, distant, always in the yard, tending roses like it was the only place he had any control left. There was a look in his eyes you only see in people who have stopped trying to change anything and decided instead to survive inside. I respected him for that. Not because it was strength, but because it was honesty. He knew exactly what he was dealing with, and he had already made his peace with it. I hadn't. The board itself was simple on paper. 5 members. 3 of them followed wherever she pointed without asking why. One of them, Gary Ostrowski, didn't. Gary had been there long enough to understand how things were supposed to work and how far she had pushed them away from that. He didn't argue loudly, didn't make scenes, didn't challenge her directly in ways that would expose him too early. He waited. That's what made him important. Even before I knew how important he was going to be. People who wait and watch don't miss much. Before the garage situation ever started, she had already shown exactly how she operated if you were paying attention. The neighborhood wasn't treated equally, not even close. North Side homes, larger, newer, cleaner looking from the outside, got courtesy, friendly knocks, quiet conversations, warnings that didn't turn into paperwork unless they had to. South Side homes, older builds, work trucks, people who didn't present the same polished image got the opposite. Certified letters, immediate fines, no conversation, no warning, just enforcement. I learned that difference the hard way months before she ever stepped foot in my garage. A friend and I had spent 4 days rebuilding a transmission in his pickup out front. It ran perfectly when we finished. Smooth, clean, no issues. It just didn't look perfect while we were working on it. That was enough for her. No knock, no message, just a certified letter citing a violation and a fee attached to it. $75. Not because something was wrong, but because it didn't look right to her. I drove that truck around the block afterward, not to prove anything to anyone else, just to confirm to myself that it worked exactly how it should. Then I paid the fine and moved on. That was my first mistake. Not the repair, not the parking, not the situation itself. The mistake was letting her think that was the end of it. People like her don't see compliance as resolution. They see it as permission. 3 months later, she showed up at my door on a Sunday afternoon holding a tray of grocery store cookies still in the plastic packaging, like it was some kind of peace offering. The sticker wasn't even fully peeled off, like she didn't think the gesture itself needed to be convincing, just present. She smiled, that same controlled expression that never quite reached her eyes, and asked for a favor. Bonus room remodel. Contractor needed space cleared, just a few boxes. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Temporary. She said temporary like it meant something permanent. I looked at that tray, then at her, and for a second I saw exactly what this was. Not a request, a setup, but I ignored that instinct. I chose to believe it was simple, because it would have been easier if it was. I said yes. That was the moment everything started moving in the wrong direction. The next morning at 7 sharp, a moving truck rolled down my street loud enough to rattle my kitchen window. Diesel engine cutting through the quiet like it didn't belong there, like it was announcing something I hadn't agreed to. I stepped outside and watched as 17 boxes came off that truck one after another, each one placed inside my garage like it had already been approved. Then came the elliptical, heavy, unused, dragged into the corner where it would sit for months without moving. Then a clothes rack wrapped in plastic. Then the rug, rolled tight, carried in and leaned against the back wall like it was settling into a long-term stay. That was the moment I should have stopped it. That was the moment I should have said something, drawn a line, corrected it before it had time to settle, but I didn't. I let it happen because I believed the timeline she gave me. 2 weeks, maybe 3, temporary. That word stayed in my head longer than it should have. 2 weeks passed. Nothing moved. 1 month passed. Nothing changed. I sent a message asking for an update. Read, no response. Sent another one later. Read, no response again. Silence stretched out longer than it should have. But by then the boxes were already part of the space. That's how it happens. Not all at once, not aggressively, just slowly enough that you adjust without realizing you're adjusting. By month 5, I couldn't park my truck in my own garage anymore. I had to move it to a friend's place down the road and start paying $60 a month just to keep it somewhere else. $60 every month for something that should have been sitting in my own space. That number stuck with me because it was measurable, tangible proof that this wasn't just inconvenience this was cost, real cost, and she wasn't paying any of it. The morning that violation notice arrived, I didn't react the way most people would. I didn't slam anything. I didn't call her immediately. I didn't raise my voice or let it turn into something loud and messy. I poured a second cup of coffee, pulled on my boots, and walked into the garage. I stood there in the cold air with that notice in one hand and the mug in the other, just looking at everything she had placed there like it belonged more than I did. 17 boxes stacked against the wall, the elliptical sitting dead in the corner, rug leaning like it owned the place, my breath visible in the air, the concrete cold under my boots, and underneath all of it, barely there but still present, the faint smell of what that space used to be. That was the moment the shift happened. Not when she asked, not when the truck arrived, not when the months passed. That moment, standing there with proof in my hand that she was not only ignoring the situation, she was using it against me. And right there, without saying anything, without reacting outwardly at all, I made the decision that ended everything she thought she controlled. She didn't just rely on authority. She built her entire presence on the assumption that nobody would ever challenge how she used it. HOA Karen didn't need to raise her voice because the system spoke for her, and she knew exactly how to position herself inside it so that every rule bent in her favor without ever looking like it did. That's the kind of control that doesn't show itself openly. It operates through patterns, through consistency, through the quiet understanding that if you push back, the system will push harder. And for most people in that neighborhood, that was enough to keep them in line. They didn't question it because questioning meant stepping into something they didn't fully understand. And stepping into something like that without preparation is how you lose. I saw the pattern clearly once I stopped ignoring it. Northside homes got warnings, conversations, a chance to fix things before they became official problems. Southside homes like mine got paperwork first and explanation never. It wasn't random, it wasn't accidental. It was targeted in a way that looked neutral on the surface but wasn't if you paid attention long enough. She had already tested that system on me once with the truck, and when I paid that fine without pushing back, she logged that result exactly how she logs everything else. Compliant, no resistance, safe to pressure again. That's how people like her operate. They don't just enforce rules, they categorize people. By the time her things had been sitting in my garage for months, she had already placed me in that category. The one that doesn't escalate, the one that absorbs inconvenience and moves on, the one that doesn't disrupt the structure she relies on. That's why she didn't respond to my messages. That's why she didn't follow up. That's why she let it stretch out as long as it did. Because from her perspective, there was no urgency. She had already decided how this would play out, and in her version, I wasn't part of the decision-making process at all. The violation notice wasn't just enforcement, it was reinforcement. It was her reminding me exactly where she thought I stood in that structure. She didn't mention the boxes. She didn't acknowledge the equipment. She didn't reference the fact that every inch of that clutter came from her. She simply cited the condition and applied the penalty, clean and official, like the cause didn't matter, as long as the outcome justified her authority. That's what made it different. It wasn't just unfair, it was controlled in a way that erased her responsibility completely. When I called her after receiving that notice, the tone she used wasn't accidental. It was practiced, calm, polished, slightly condescending, like she was explaining something obvious to someone who just hadn't caught up yet. Derek, darling, the HOA has standards. She didn't say that to inform. She said it to reinforce the idea that she was the one defining those standards in that moment. That's how she maintained control. Not by arguing, but by framing everything in a way that made resistance look unreasonable. The HOA meetings were where that control became visible if you knew what to look for. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, a room that smelled like burnt coffee, and low expectations. She sat at the front table like it was an extension of her authority, running through the agenda with a rhythm that didn't allow interruptions. Every item moved forward. Every vote followed the same predictable pattern, and every question that challenged her even slightly was redirected or minimized before it could gain any weight. She didn't shut people down directly. She guided them away from anything that might disrupt the flow she controlled. The board itself was structured to support that flow. 3 members who followed her lead without deviation, not because they were incapable of thinking independently, but because it was easier to align with her than to push against her. 1 member who stayed quiet most of the time, not out of agreement, but out of caution. And Gary, sitting at the end of the table, watching, listening, not interrupting unless he had to. He didn't waste his words, and that made them matter more when he used them. When I attended that meeting and stood up to speak, I didn't raise my voice or turn it into something emotional. I read facts, dates, numbers, timeline. 8 months of her things in my garage, 17 boxes, 1 elliptical vehicle, 1 rug, 5 months of paying to store my own truck somewhere else, $150 fine issued by the same person responsible for the condition being cited. I laid it out exactly how it happened, without adding anything extra, without trying to make it sound worse than it already was. The room went quiet, not because they were shocked, but because they were processing something they hadn't seen laid out like that before. Most of them knew how she operated on some level, but they hadn't seen it presented in a way that connected all the pieces. That's what documentation does. It removes interpretation and replaces it with structure. She didn't react to it the way most people would. She didn't argue, didn't deny it outright, didn't let it turn into a confrontation. She thanked me for my comments, said the board would review the matter internally, and moved on to the next agenda item like nothing had happened. That's how she maintained control. She didn't allow moments to expand. She compressed them, redirected them, and kept everything moving before anyone else had time to engage. But control like that only works inside the room. Outside, in the parking lot, where there's no agenda, no structure, no formal process, she approached me differently. Gravel crunching underfoot, cold air cutting through the silence. The rest of the homeowners already gone. She stepped up beside me, voice lower now, tone adjusted just enough to signal that this wasn't for public record anymore. Derek, I'd hate for a property like yours to come up for a county reassessment. These things happen, sometimes random. That wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a warning in the way people usually think of warnings. It was pressure, quiet, precise pressure, applied exactly where she believed it would have the most effect. She wasn't telling me what she would do. She was telling me what she was capable of doing, and leaving the rest for me to understand on my own. I didn't argue with her there either. I didn't react. I didn't give her anything she could measure. I just acknowledged it and walked away. That's the part she didn't expect. People like her rely on reaction to calibrate their next move. They push, they observe, they adjust. When there's no reaction, there's nothing to calibrate against. And that's when they start making mistakes. That same night, I started looking deeper into what she had placed in my garage. Not just physically, but structurally. The moving truck that showed up months earlier wasn't random. It had a logo, a registration, a business tied to it. When I ran the plates and traced it back, the name attached wasn't just hers personally. It was tied to a registered company, Whitfield Interiors, LLC. That changed everything. What had been presented as a personal favor, temporary storage for a home remodel, was actually something else entirely. She wasn't clearing out her own space. She was storing business inventory, commercial assets, client materials, and she had been doing it in my garage without disclosure, without compensation, and without any intention of moving it unless it benefited her to do so. That shifted the entire structure of the situation. This wasn't a neighbor asking for help anymore. This was a business using private residential property as a free storage facility, while the owner of that property paid out of pocket to deal with the consequences, and she fined me for it. Once that clicked into place, everything else she had done started to look different. The ignored messages, the delay, the lack of urgency, the violation notice, the threat in the parking lot. None of it was random. It was all part of the same pattern. Maintain control, avoid accountability, apply pressure where needed, and assume the other side won't push back hard enough to break the structure. That assumption was the one thing she got completely wrong, because by the time I understood exactly how she was operating, I wasn't inside her system anymore. I was building something outside of it, something she couldn't control, something she couldn't redirect, something that didn't depend on her authority at all. And once that starts, once someone steps outside the structure you rely on to maintain control, everything you built inside starts to weaken, whether you see it happen or not. I didn't confront her. I built something she couldn't step around. That's the difference between reacting and ending something permanently. The moment I realized her temporary storage was actually commercial inventory tied to a registered business, everything stopped being gray and turned sharp. This wasn't a neighbor overstepping anymore. This was exploitation wrapped in politeness and enforced through authority. And once you see something clearly like that, the next step isn't emotion, it's structure. I went back into that garage the same way I had walked into job sites for 30 years, not as a man dealing with a problem, but as a man documenting one. Every box got photographed, every label captured, every angle recorded. Not rushed, not sloppy, not emotional, methodical. I didn't miss anything because missing something is how people lose when it matters. The crack in the elliptical handle, the way the clothes rack leaned into my tool chest like it belonged there, the exact placement of every box stacked against the wall. I captured all of it, not because I needed to remember it, but because I needed to prove it. Then I documented the messages. 2 texts sent, both read, both ignored. That silence wasn't empty anymore. It was evidence. I screenshotted timestamps, read receipts, and everything that showed. I had given her time, and she had chosen not to respond. I stepped outside and photographed the violation notice next to my mailbox. Date visible, time clear. That piece mattered because it connected everything. Her items created the condition, her authority penalized it, and her silence allowed it to continue. That's not coincidence. That's structure. I went back inside and pulled out a spiral notebook. Cheap blue cover, nothing special to look at, but it became the center of everything that followed. I sat at the kitchen table and started writing. Every date, every cost, every moment that mattered. The day she showed up with the cookie tray, the day the moving truck arrived, the 17 boxes, the 5 months of paying $60 to store my truck somewhere else, the $150 fine, all of it in order, all of it in ink. That notebook wasn't just notes, it was alignment. It forced everything into sequence, and once something is in sequence, it becomes harder to deny. I didn't know it yet, but that notebook was going to carry more weight than anything she said, anything she implied, anything she tried to rewrite later, because she spoke in tone, in implication, in authority. I was writing, in fact. I delivered her a written notice that same afternoon. Not aggressive, not emotional, just clear. The garage needed to be cleared immediately. The fine needed to be reimbursed. The costs I had incurred needed to be addressed. 14 days. That's all I gave her. Enough time to respond, not enough time to manipulate. I didn't hand it to her directly. I left it at her door. That mattered too. No conversation, no interpretation, just a written request tied to a timeline. What came back wasn't a response to me. It was an email to the entire HOA board with me copied into it, framing me as hostile, uncooperative, disruptive. She didn't mention the 8 months. She didn't mention the boxes. She didn't mention the costs. She didn't mention the fine she issued on a situation she created. She changed the narrative instead. That's how she operated. When facts didn't support her, she shifted the frame. But that move didn't help her the way she thought it would. It exposed something else. She wasn't responding to the situation. She was trying to control how the situation was perceived, and that only works when there isn't a record strong enough to contradict. That's when I circled the next HOA meeting on my calendar. 11 years living there, never attended one, never needed to. But this wasn't about preference anymore. This was about placement. If she wanted to move this into a public structure, I would meet her there with something she couldn't redirect. The meeting room felt exactly like it always did. Fluorescent lights buzzing, chairs set up in rows, that same burnt coffee smell hanging in the air like it had been there for years. She sat at the front, running through the agenda like she always did. Controlled, composed, unbothered. She didn't look at me once. That was intentional. Ignoring something is another way of controlling it, if you believe it won't push back hard enough to matter. When public comments opened, I stood up and read from a prepared statement. No deviation, no improvisation, no emotion. 8 months of occupancy, 17 boxes, 1 elliptical, 1 rug, 1 clothes rack, $480 in parking costs, $150 fine issued by the same board member whose property caused the condition. I placed a copy of that statement on the table and sat down. The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it stretched longer than that. Not because nobody had anything to say, but because they were processing something structured in a way they weren't used to seeing. Gary leaned forward at the end of the table. Not surprised, not react, just focused, like he had been waiting for something like this to appear. She thanked me, said the board would review the matter internally, and moved on. Same pattern. Compress, redirect, maintain control. But outside, in the parking lot, she dropped the structure again. That's where people like her show what they rely on when the system isn't actively supporting them. The thread about the county reassessment wasn't casual. It was precise. It told me exactly how far she was willing to push if she felt pressure coming back at her. And that's when I went deeper. The moving truck wasn't just a truck anymore. It was a link. I ran the plates, traced the registration, pulled the business records. Whitfield Interiors, LLC. Active, registered, real. That meant everything sitting in my garage wasn't just hers personal. It was tied to a business, client inventory, staging equipment, commercial use. I sat at my kitchen table and let that settle in completely before writing it down. Not rushed, not excited, just clear. This wasn't a favor any. This was unauthorized commercial storage. 8 months of it. Without permission, without compensation, while I paid out of pocket to deal with the consequences, and while she fined me for it. I wrote it in capital letters in the notebook and underlined it twice. That's when the situation stopped being something she could control through tone or authority. It moved into something that had structure behind it that didn't belong to her. I remembered something I had heard years ago about possessory lien rights. Didn't think much of it at the time. Just a piece of information that didn't seem relevant then. It was relevant now. I called Pete Drummond, a paralegal I had known since high school, the kind of guy who doesn't waste time and doesn't guess when it comes to things like this. I asked him one question. What happens when someone uses your private property for commercial storage without permission or compensation? He didn't answer right away. 4 seconds of silence. Then he said it. That's a genuinely interesting question. The next morning he called back with the answer structured in a way I could work with. Possessory lien. Ohio law. If someone leaves property in your custody and owes you money tied to that property, you have a claim against it. A legal claim. Not theoretical, not emotional, legal. I wrote it down exactly as he said it. Section number. Requirements. Process. 14-day notice. Cure period. If they don't comply, you have the right to dispose of the property to recover costs. And then he said something that mattered more than the law itself. Your documentation is unusually good. That wasn't luck. That was habit. 30 years of work teaches you that the argument you lose is almost always the one where the other guy wrote it down and you didn't. Pete drafted the demand letter. Formal, precise, everything laid out clearly. 8 months of unauthorized commercial storage. $480 in parking costs. $150 fine. 14 days to resolve it. Certified mail. Return receipt. I added it to the notebook, and then I waited. That's the part most people get wrong. They think once they have leverage, they need to use it immediately. They rush. They act too early. They give the other side time to adjust. I didn't do that. I waited because I knew something she didn't. People who rely on control patterns don't stop suddenly. They continue them, and when they continue them, they make mistakes. All I had to do was let her make one more. The 14-day deadline didn't end with a resolution. It ended with confirmation. Confirmation that she still believed she controlled the outcome, that she still believed time was something she could stretch until the pressure disappeared on its own. Day 14 passed without payment, without removal, without acknowledgement, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. Then, late on the 13th night, one message came. 8 words. Derek, I'll be in touch soon. That was it. No urgency, no accountability, no recognition of what had been building underneath her for weeks. Just delay, just assumption, just the same pattern she had relied on from the beginning. I wrote the time down in the notebook. 11:20 p.m. and underneath it I wrote something even more important. She still thinks this is her timeline. That line mattered because it meant she hadn't adjusted, hadn't recalibrated, hadn't realized the position she was actually in. The next morning, Pete confirmed what I already knew. The cure period had expired. Possessory lien rights were fully active, legally, structurally, completely active. I could move forward, I could dispose of the property, I could recover costs. Everything was aligned, but I didn't move immediately. That's where experience comes in. Acting the moment you have enough leverage gets you a result. Waiting until the other side makes one more mistake gets you control. And she was still making mistakes. She wasn't done yet. At the next HOA meeting, properly scheduled this time because Gary had forced compliance, she introduced something new. A Community Property Standards Initiative. That's what she called it. What it actually was another layer of control. Homeowners would now need approval before hosting any outdoor gathering. Barbecues, birthdays, any event, all subject to board inspection and approval. Her approval. She presented it smoothly, dressed it in language about maintaining standards, protecting investments, preserving community integrity. The kind of language that sounds reasonable until you look at what it actually does. It shifts control from individual ownership to centralized authority, and she expected it to pass the same way everything else did. Quietly, predictably, I sat in the back row and listened, not reacting, not interrupting, just letting her build it the way she always did. When public comments opened, I stood up and asked one question, calm, direct, whether the board president was required to recuse herself from matters involving personal interest under Section 9, Paragraph 4 of the governing documents. Then I read the clause out loud, slowly, word for word. The room didn't shift dramatically, but something changed. The rhythm broke, the automatic nodding stopped. One of the board members, Paul, looked down at his papers like they might give him an answer he didn't have. She didn't lose control in that moment, not outward. Her smile stayed exactly where it was, but her eyes changed, just for a second. A recalculation, a recognition that something she assumed was settled wasn't settled anymore. She pushed the vote through anyway, 4-1, Gary against. But the outcome didn't matter as much as the shift that happened in that room. People felt it, not loudly, not dramatic, but enough to make them hesitate, enough to make them start paying attention. 2 weeks later, the phone call came. County assessor's office, routine property reinspection, no reason given, just routine. I stood there holding the phone, looking out at my garage, and the timing lined up too cleanly to ignore. A few days earlier, a neighbor had mentioned seeing her Cadillac parked outside the municipal building, mid-morning. Not her usual pattern. That detail mattered because it connected the threat she made in the parking lot to something real. I called the assessor's office back and asked one question. Was the review initiated by a complaint? The woman on the other end paused, just long enough, then said routine. That pause said everything the word didn't. I wrote it down. Date, time, her presence at the municipal building, the phone call, the pause. That's how you build something that holds. You don't need confirmation when the pattern is clear. She had escalated. She had taken it outside the HOA structure and into something bigger, and in doing that, she handed me something she couldn't take back. By mid-November, everything was aligned in a way she didn't see. Possessory lien active, illegal meeting recorded, conflict of interest document, threat recorded, county involvement track, commercial use established, 8 months of storage tied to a registered business. That wasn't one piece of leverage. That was a structure. On her side, she had one message: I'll be in touch soon, and a plan she thought would work. A neighbor overheard her talking about needing the inventory back before Thanksgiving, staging equipment for a client. That meant she intended to come and take everything back, quiet, without paying, without acknowledging anything, without consequence. That was her move. Show up, load it, leave. Reset the situation like it never happened. That was the mistake I was waiting for. Because while she was planning to take everything back, I was planning something she couldn't interrupt once it started. I opened Facebook Marketplace and started writing. Not quickly, not casually. Every word mattered. Free pickup, tonight, first come, first serve. No holds, gone by morning. Simple, direct, no space for delay, no room for interpretation. Once it went live, it wouldn't matter what she wanted. Before I posted it, I confirmed everything, every angle, every detail. Legally sound, documented, defensible. This wasn't retaliation. This was collection. That distinction mattered. The law wasn't on my side because I was angry. It was on my side because I was correct. I recorded a full walkthrough of the garage. Every item visible, time-stamped, condition documented, uploaded it, backed it up, everything secured. Then I posted the listing. The response was immediate. Messages stacked faster than I could read them. People asking if they could come now, if they could take everything, if it was real. That's when the shift happened. Not conceptually, not strategically, physically. Movement replaced stillness. The first truck arrived within minutes. No hesitation, no questions. The rug went first. Dragged out, loaded, gone. The smell disappeared with it like it had never belonged there. Then the elliptical, carried out, taken without ceremony. Then the boxes, one by one, each one leaving faster than it had arrived. More cars pulled up, more people, different faces, same intention. Take what was there before someone else did. No one cared where it came from. No one cared who owned it. They saw opportunity and acted on it. That's the part she never understood. Authority doesn't matter to people who aren't inside the system. Within hours, the garage emptied. Not slowly, not gradually, completely. By 11:35 that night, there was nothing left. No boxes, no equipment, no rug, just concrete, clean, open, mine. I stood there in the center of it, under that same weak bulb, and for the first time in months, it felt like it belonged to me again. No celebration, no noise, just restoration. The next morning she arrived. She walked into that garage expecting control, and found nothing. No confrontation, no explanation, no argument, just absence. That's what broke her. Not what I said, not what I did, what wasn't there anymore. She stood in that space, looking at empty concrete where 8 months of her decisions used to sit. And for the first time, she had nothing to enforce, nothing to take back. What came after wasn't chaos, it was confirmation. She didn't show up at my door, didn't knock, didn't try to confront me face to face. That alone told me everything about how off balance she was. People who believe they still have control come directly. They assert, they demand. She didn't. She retreated into distance, into messages, into the same structured communication she had relied on from the beginning, except now it was different. The tone shifted faster than she could contain it. The first message came in, clip formal, still trying to hold on to authority. Derek, what has happened to the items stored in your garage? No greeting, no acknowledgement, just a question framed like an accusation. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The situation itself was already answering for me. The next messages came faster, less control. What did you do with my property? Where are the items? This is unacceptable. Each one losing a little more composure than the last. The structure she relied on starting to slip under pressure she didn't know how to manage. By the 7th message, the tone changed completely. Capital letters started appearing. Words like unlawful, theft, consequences. By the 9th, she crossed into something she couldn't take back. I will have you arrested. She repeated it twice more before the messages stopped. 11 texts in total. 11 pieces of documentation that showed exactly what happens when control disappears and panic replaces it. I screenshotted every one of them. Time, date, sequence. Added them to the record without responding. Then I forwarded them to Pete. His reply came back in minutes. Short, direct, beautiful, don't answer. Let her keep going. That's how you let someone build your case for you without realizing. Around 9 in the morning there was a knock at my door. Not her, a police officer. Calm, routine, already reading the situation before he stepped inside. He didn't come in aggressive, didn't come in expecting conflict. He came in expecting something that needed to be sorted out, and I could see it in the way he looked at the space, at me, at the situation as a whole. I invited him in, offered coffee, kept everything exactly the same as it had been from the beginning. Controlled, clear, structured. I placed the notebook on the table and walked him through it from the first page page to the last. The timeline, the photos, the messages, the certified letter, the return receipt, the violation notice, the recorded threat, the business registration, every piece in order, nothing missing, nothing exaggerated. He didn't interrupt. He didn't question unnecessarily. He just followed the sequence, the way someone does when they recognize the difference between a complaint and a document case. He stepped outside, made a call, came back in, and said exactly what I expected him to say. This is a civil matter. That sentence mattered more than anything else she had tried to throw it, because it meant everything she was attempting to escalate it to something immediate, something forceful, something that would put me on the defensive. Didn't hold. It wasn't criminal. It wasn't urgent. It was structured, and structure doesn't respond to panic. He left, the door closed, and just like that, one of her strongest attempts to regain control dissolved without impact. She didn't stop there. By noon, she moved to the one place she thought she could still control perception, the neighborhood Facebook group. She didn't name me directly, didn't state specifics, didn't lay out facts. She framed a neighbor taking advantage, property removed without consent, predatory behavior. She used that word twice. That's how she operated when she couldn't control the situation directly. She tried to control how it looked to everyone else. I read the post sitting in my garage, on the same stool that had been pushed into the corner for months, now back where it belonged. The space around me clean, open, silent, and I watched how it played out exactly the way I expected it to. Not everyone believed her. 4 comments supported her immediately. Predictable. The same people who always aligned with her. But then the questions started. Simple ones at first. What happened? What's the full story? Clarifications she couldn't provide without exposing herself. That's where control breaks down. Not under attack, but under questioning. Then Gary comment. Calm, structured, 6 sentences, no accusations, no emotion, just an opening. There's more context here that hasn't been shared. I'm willing to provide it privately. There are 2 sides to this, and the one not being told is more complete. That was enough. Within minutes, people react. Interest, curiosity, attention shifting away from her framing and towards something she couldn't control anymore. She deleted the post. Too late. Screenshots existed. Not just mine. Others had them too. That's the thing about trying to control perception after you lose control of reality. It doesn't hold. Days later, the next move came. A letter. Formal. Heavy paper. Legal language stretched thin over weak ground. It accused me of unlawful conversion of property. Demanded replacement value. Threatened legal action. It looked serious if you didn't know what you were reading. I read it once. Then I scanned it and sent it to Pete. He called me back in under 10 minutes. The lawyer wasn't a litigation attorney. He handled real estate closings, contracts, paperwork, not cases like this. The letter wasn't a move forward. It was a bluff, a performance designed to pressure me into backing down. So I didn't respond. I wrote the date down in the notebook. That mattered more than replying, because every move she made now cost her something. Time, money, position, and every one of those costs was stacking up against a structure she didn't control any. That's when I built the binder. Not for show, not for intimidation, for clarity. Everything organized, tabbed, indexed, photos, messages, letters, transcripts, recordings, timeline, 47 pages, clean, structured, complete. The kind of document you place on a table once and don't need to explain twice, because at that point it wasn't about reacting to what she was doing any. It was about being ready for the moment where everything she built collapsed under its own weight, and that moment was already getting closer. By the time the annual meeting arrived, nothing needed to be forced any. That's how you know something is already over before it officially ends. The room was fuller than it had any reason to be. More people than usual. More attention than she was used to controlling. More eyes than she could redirect with a smooth sentence and a practiced tone. Word had moved quietly, not loudly, not dramatic, just enough to bring people in who normally wouldn't have cared. That's what happens when a pattern finally becomes visible. People don't rush in all at once. They show up when it starts to matter. She walked in the same way she always did. Composed, controlled, linen blazer like nothing had shifted. That part never changed. That's what made it almost clinical to watch, because everything around her had already moved, and she was still standing in the version of the room she thought existed. She started the meeting the same way she always had. Agenda, reports, updates, smooth transitions, no hesitation, no acknowledgement of anything outside that structure. That's how she held control for so long. She never broke pattern unless she absolutely had to. But patterns don't survive exposure. When the meeting reached the point where governance issues could be raised, I stood up. No rush, no hesitation, binder in hand, 47 pages of everything she had tried to stretch, hide, ignore, or redirect. I didn't look at her first. I addressed the room. That mattered, because this wasn't between me and her anymore. This was about the structure she had used, and the way she had used it. I laid it out the same way I had built it. Timeline first. Not emotional, not exaggerated. Just sequence. Cookie tray, moving truck, 17 boxes, 8 months, $60 a month, $150 fine, certified letter, ignored messages. Every piece placed exactly where it belonged. The room didn't interrupt. It didn't need to. People were following it the same way the officer had, the same way Pete had, the same way anyone does when something is structured in a way that doesn't leave room for interpretation. Then the audio played. 30 seconds, that's all it took. Her voice, clear, measured, overriding a rule she was supposed to follow. The illegal meeting, the one she thought would stay inside the room it happened in. It didn't. Nothing she did stayed contained anymore. That's what happens when documentation meets exposure. The room shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough that you could feel it without anyone saying it out loud. That's the moment control changes hands. Not when someone argues louder, not when someone reacts harder. When the room stops leaning in one direction and starts balancing. I showed the business registration next. Whitfield Interiors LLC, placed next to the box labels. Staging inventory, commercial use, stored in my garage. 8 months, free, while I paid to move my own property out of the way, while I was fined for the condition it created. That's when the understanding locked in. Not confusion, not debate, understanding. She spoke for the first time in that moment, and the difference was immediate. Not the words, the tone, tight, controlled, but strained in a way that hadn't been there before. She said it wasn't accurate, not a denial backed by anything, just a statement. That's what people fall back on when structure leaves them. Statements without support. Someone from the back of the room said something simple. Let him finish. That's all it took. I finished. I placed copies of the summary in front of the board. One in front of her, one in front of Gary, one in front of the others, and one in front of the reporter sitting quietly in the second row, who hadn't said a word but hadn't missed anything either. Then I said what I had decided weeks earlier. No removal, no spectacle, no escalation. Reverse the fine. Close the lien. Review governance so this doesn't happen again. That was it. No speech, no anger, no need for anything else. I sat down. The room responded. Not with noise, not with exaggeration, just with something real. Acknowledgement. That's what it sounded like. Not for me, for the situation, for the fact that something had been laid out clearly enough that it couldn't be ignored anymore. She tried to respond. Used the same language she always did. Procedural issues, personal motives, community standards. But it didn't land the same way, because once people see structure, that they don't go back to tone. And then it happened. Paul spoke. 2 years of sitting there, following her lead without deviation, without resistance, without question. And he said 7 words that ended everything she had built inside that room. We need to table this and review. That was it. No argument, no explanation, just a shift. Gary seconded it before the silence could fill the space. And just like that, the structure she had relied on stopped holding. The election didn't happen that night. The review did. Weeks later, the results came back exactly how they had to. Not exaggerated, not dramatic, just clear. The meeting she forced was invalid. The fine she issued was void. The conflict of interest was confirmed. Policy changes required. She didn't show up to contest anything. The judgment came through clean. $630 plus costs. Filed, closed. It wasn't about the money. It never was. At the next meeting, she stepped down. Same tone, same posture, same controlled delivery. No acknowledgement of what had happened. No apology. No explanation. Just a statement about focusing on other priorities. Then she left before the meeting and Ron followed. He didn't look back. That was the last time she tried anything. The garage went back to exactly what it was. Not improved, not changed, restored. The truck moved back in on a Saturday morning. Parked in the same place it had always belonged. Tools where they should be. Floor clean. Air right again. WD-40 and sawdust replacing everything she had forced into it. No noise, no announcement, just correction. The neighborhood adjusted slowly after that. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Policies shifted. Processes changed. People started paying attention to things they hadn't before. Gary took over quiet, reduced fines, added warnings, made things work the way they should have from the beginning. Nothing loud, nothing forced, just better. And that's how it ended. Not with a confrontation, not with a final argument, not with anything she could respond to, just with the absence of everything she thought she controlled. HOA Karen went silent.